Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer, our daily brief on global markets and geopolitics. We've got a seriously fascinating journey ahead of us today. We're going to go from the sweeping macro-level tensions in the Middle East, dive straight into European sovereign debt, and then zoom all the way down to the micro-level realities of what you actually pay at the local gas pump. Today, it's all about the facts and the mechanics. We're pulling apart how these incredibly complex systems actually function right behind the headlines.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's what's on the docket today. First up, the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Second, we'll ask if Iran's infrastructure can actually survive. Third, we're looking at Europe's Chinese debt gamble. And fourth, the hidden cost of gasoline. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The Strait of Hormuz Blockade.
So, to really grasp the global market implications of this huge geopolitical standoff, we have to look strictly at the operational side of things. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Will a blockade permanently damage Iran's oil fields? Now, it's super easy to think of blockades just as financial tools, right? Like just a way to stop money from changing hands. But the actual stakes here, they're entirely physical. We are talking about massive, complex engineering systems here, and, well, when you forcefully stop them, things break.
Let's break down the theoretical logic behind Donald Trump's strategy here. It's basically a 5-step mechanical process. Step 1, you close the Strait of Hormuz to stop the exports. Step 2, since the oil literally has nowhere to go, you force the country to exhaust its internal storage capacity. Once those tanks are completely full, Step 3 triggers a forced production shutdown. They physically have to cap the wells. Step 4 is the intended result, causing irreparable well damage because of the sudden loss of pressure and flow. And finally, Step 5, the threat of this permanent infrastructural damage forces a political capitulation. So it's a strategy completely designed to create a physical bottleneck that literally breaks the machine itself.
But to really understand the gravity of just turning off the taps, we've got to look back at history. Take a look at these historic Iranian production drops. In 2016 and 2023, yeah, we saw reductions because of sanctions, but they were just that, reductions. 1951? That is the true, terrifying precedent here. Back in 1951, output went all the way down to zero. And when they finally tried to turn the machines back on, they actually couldn't. The damage was so incredibly severe that it took a massive international consortium and heavy investment from British Petroleum just to fix the pipes and get the oil flowing again. No way around it, a full stop is devastating.
Section 2. Can Iran's infrastructure survive?
You know, it's one thing to have a geopolitical theory about blockading a strait. It's a whole other thing to evaluate the actual physical health of the pipes and pumps sitting on the ground right now. Does this strategy actually hold water today? Well, looking at the current infrastructure status, the reality is pretty bleak. We're looking at decades of heavy international sanctions that have severely diminished their national oil revenue. And what little revenue does come in, it's largely diverted to defense budgets, not reinvested into modernizing their oil tech. Because of this massive lack of reinvestment, the systems have drastically deteriorated. Analysts actually compare this state of disrepair to the infrastructure collapse we saw in Venezuela. So this system is already immensely fragile. Forcing a total shutdown on this kind of weakened infrastructure carries catastrophic physical risk.
Now, what's really interesting about this divergence is how blockade actually impacts different resources. We really need to separate the gas fields from the oil fields. Iran shares the largest gas field in the world with Qatar. But check out the offshore gas fields. They're basically at zero revenue right now anyway. Why? Well, extracting offshore requires these very specific compressors that they just can't buy due to sanctions. And the onshore extraction infrastructure was recently bombed by Israeli aviation. So a naval blockade doesn't really affect the gas fields because, well, they aren't making money right now regardless. But the oil fields, they bear the absolute brunt of the risk. If they're forced to stop, the long-term deterioration could be immense. But here is the massive catch in this whole blockade theory. Enter the Khuzestan exception. Khuzestan is this incredibly massive, specific oil field with very unique geological characteristics. And unlike the vulnerable fields we just talked about, the Khuzestan field can actually withstand 100% production cuts without sustaining physical damage. So, what does this actually mean for the geopolitical standoff? It means the true damage to the regime from a blockade is primarily financial. It's not a permanent physical destruction of their most vital asset. So, let's summarize the market reality here. The initial assumption by many experts was that a blockade would force capitulation in about 22 days as the storage tanks filled up. But honestly, that completely ignores human creativity. Iran is aggressively using evasion tactics. They're moving oil via overland trucks, rail networks, and a whole fleet of small coastal ships that hug the shoreline just to bypass the naval blockade. Because of all this, the financial bleeding is slowed down, meaning this global market instability, it isn't going to be a quick 3-week shock. It'll likely stretch out for a solid 4 to 5 months.
Section 3. Europe's Chinese debt gamble.
All right, let's pull you down the next level of the macro funnel, moving away from energy blockades and over to international sovereign debt. This is a truly fascinating development that's caught a lot of people off guard. The big question driving this section is, why are European nations, specifically Slovenia and Portugal, suddenly issuing sovereign debt denominated in Chinese renminbi? Just to give you some context on how rare this is, the last time a major European player did this was France, way back in 2015. So why the sudden pivot to China right now?
The answer to that question is that number right there, 1.89%. Right now, the Chinese 10-year bond yield is hovering somewhere between 1.75% and 1.89%. From a purely immediate financial perspective, this is incredibly cheap financing, especially when you compare it to the current cost of issuing debt in euros. China has a massive surplus of savings, and they're eager to place that money internationally to build up geopolitical influence, funding things like battery factories and power grids in Portugal. For these European treasuries, that low rate is highly, highly tempting.
So, the crucial point is outlined right here in our breakdown. Yes, the strategy offers the immediate benefit of cheap financing, but look at that bottom row, the hidden trap. In economics, there's always an equilibrium, right? And the trap here is extreme currency risk. Right now, the renminbi against the euro is in a structurally bullish setup. It's moving laterally at a floor. If the renminbi rebounds and actually appreciates against the euro, the actual cost of paying back that debt absolutely explodes. What looked like super cheap financing could quickly turn into a total financial nightmare for European taxpayers if the currency swings the wrong way.
Section 4. The hidden cost of gasoline.
We've talked global oil logistics, we've talked international debt. Now we're zooming all the way down into the microeconomic level. Let's start with a core, relatable truth that you experience every single time you fuel up your car. At the pump, you weren't just paying for the volatility of global crude oil. You are actually paying for domestic policy. We spend so much time obsessing over geopolitical conflicts and the price of a barrel of oil. But honestly, that's only a fraction of the story actually hitting your wallet.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what I mean. Take a look at this breakdown of average gasoline prices across the OECD and G7 nations. The actual crude oil, the literal physical commodity pulled from the ground and shipped across the oceans, only accounts for 33% of the price. Meanwhile, a staggering 48% of the price is purely taxes. I mean, almost half of what you pay isn't even for fuel, it's a direct payment to the state. The remaining 19% just covers the refining and distribution.
And in a lot of major economies, it's actually even more extreme than that. In France, the UK, and Germany, taxes exceed 50% of the total cost of gasoline. Let that sink in for a second. This is a genuinely vital metric to keep in mind. Whenever you see news about the Strait of Hormuz causing a 5% spike in crude oil prices, just remember that this volatility is only applying to 1/3 of the price formula. The rest of it, it's just a fixed local tax burden. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. With geopolitical blockades threatening the physical supply of energy and hidden currency risks completely shifting the landscape of global debt, how will these hidden market forces, from the Persian Gulf all the way to European treasuries, ultimately affect your wallet in the coming months? Because these markets are deeply interconnected, and understanding the actual mechanics behind them is the absolute only way to navigate them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the data.